Lease options are really just a technique in which we utilize a specific set of contracts that allow us to control a property without taking ownership, without taking title, but still allow us to control that property through a document known as a lease option. Basically, it's synonymous with a rent-to-own, lease-to-own type of an arrangement.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. Hello and welcome to episode 210. What do you do if you don't have a ton of cash to get into real estate investing? Many people are looking for a way to start investing, but they don't want to go to banks or hard money lenders. Well, my guest today may just have the answer for those investors. Jim Aydelotte teaches how anyone can put $5,000 to $15,000 in their bank account in 30 days or less using simple techniques that don't require you to have a lot of cash. Today, we're going to talk about structuring win-win deals in today's market with lease options. And according to Jim, they're the fastest way to make money in real estate. Jim is the Lease Option Coach, and he's a nationally recognized and ultra-successful lease option expert. He coaches hundreds of students all over the country, and he will also be a featured speaker at the 2020 Michigan Landlord and Real Estate Investor Annual Conference and Expo right here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, next month, February 27th through 29th. You can go to rpoaonline.org to find out more. Jim's topic will be how to put $5,000 to $10,000 in your bank account in 30 days using lease option strategies. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. It's great to be with you.
Yes, well, I'm excited to learn more about lease options today, and I'm certainly excited to see you come speak at the annual conference. But before we get into all that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started investing in real estate?
Sure, Brian. A lot of times, these kind of events take place in our life. They're a little bit serendipitous, and for me, I'm coming out of an engineering background. I was a corporate engineer. My background is double E in my schooling. Spent about 22 years in that field and kind of focused on permanent electromagnetics, and just kind of got sick and tired of the corporate stuff, the nonsense. And about 18, 19 years ago, I ended up going to a weekend function where somebody came in and taught all kind of different strategies. I knew nothing about real estate investing at all, and I mean nothing. I knew people bought some houses or some multi-units and they would rent them. That's about the extent of my understanding of real estate investing. And that kind of opened my eyes to the possibilities. Well, I left that weekend with my wife, and we kind of got kicked that around. We were pretty excited about it, but I didn't do anything for about 4 years.
What was that seminar, by the way?
That was a Pretty and Ugly House business seminar put on by Ron LeGrand.
Okay.
Which was in Lansing at the time, and it was a free weekend. So we left that function, and again, really didn't know where to start. I kind of joke about it. I tell people I felt like a mosquito in a nudist colony. I knew what I wanted to do. I just didn't know where to begin. Right? And one of the things that I discovered is after spending some time trying to analyze this and digest it, I realized that this was something that I really needed to find out more about. I had to learn more. Around that time, I was called into the ministry. I actually left the corporate world in 2006 and took the full-time call to ministry. I'm still a pastor today. And what that did was it kind of forced me to take some action, because after 3 or 4 years of kind of being around and listening and reading and studying materials related to real estate investing, I went from a very good salary to virtually no salary at all. And there were 5 of us in the family. So I began implementing lease option strategies. In fact, it was the only way I could because I didn't have any money. I didn't want to use any of my money to begin with, but that worked out because I didn't have any, right? So went into kind of the 06, 07 time frame, right when the market started tanking. And I was putting many houses under contract and controlling properties with none of my own money and creating a lot of income. And that's how I got started.
So Jim, why don't you tell us what lease options are? And, for a lot of our listeners may not even be familiar with a lease option. So why don't you give us the basics?
Sure. Lease options are really just a technique in which we utilize a specific set of contracts that allow us to control a property without taking ownership, without taking title, but still allow us to control that property through a document known as a lease option. Basically, it's synonymous with a rent-to-own, lease-to-own type of an arrangement. What we do in this case, though, is when we put this under contract, we obviously are looking to put this under contract to where we're creating significant difference in either the amount we're buying it for and the amount we're able to move it for to another tenant, to a tenant buyer, rather, a near qualified tenant buyer is what we call them. And if that equity exists and it's worth our while to stay in the deal, we stay in between the seller and our end tenant buyer. And as it's been described before, they're like the bread on both sides of us. We're the meat in the middle. And we stay in the middle of the agreement to generate the income in the difference between monthly rent, the amount that I pay versus the amount the tenant buyer is paying, and so on and so forth. And that's what we call a sandwich lease option.
Can you give us an example of how that sandwich lease option works, a real-world example?
Sure. A real-world example would be we recently put a property under contract that is worth about $200,000 currently. Does not need work, so we're not looking for junkers or properties to rehab. And we picked that property up for about $165,000 on contract. Our monthly payments to the seller is about $1,300. So we have a property that's worth $200,000. We picked it up for $165,000. Our monthly payment is $1,300. We turned around, moved that property actually for $2,099. Okay, so we increased that value a little bit. We ended up getting a $20,000 down payment, and we're leasing the property to the tenant buyer for 18 months for $1,600. And that's a $300 a month cash flow. So the seller in this case, they just wanted out. They just wanted to move on with their life and go on. We have tenant buyers that are waiting for houses like this, and that many of them have significant amount to put down. So in this case, we got a $20,000 payment on the front end. We're getting $300 a month in cash flow. At the end, in rough figures, between what the tenant buyer will owe us and what we will pay the seller to pay them off, we'll make an additional roughly $35,000. So we'll make probably in the vicinity of about $55,000 over 24 months on a property that I didn't borrow any money to buy it. I didn't use my credit. I didn't get a hard money lender. I didn't rehab it. I didn't take title to it. I just controlled the property with a lease option contract.
And that's what you just described as what's considered a sandwich lease option?
Exactly, Brian, because I'm staying in between the seller and the tenant buyer.
Gotcha. So you're the meat and the cheese.
That's right.
In this sandwich. Did you put any money down yourself when you got it under lease option?
No, I did not. In fact, a lot of times what we do in these situations where the seller says, I need some money or I need something down, we will agree to give them something down only when we bring the tenant buyer. So in this case, we agreed to give them $2,500 down once the tenant buyer paid their option fee to us.
So that $2,500 came out of the $20,000 that the tenant buyer gave you. Gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So I do have a lot of questions, but I interrupted you because you were about to tell us the second way that you can do lease options.
The second way would be, let's just take that same scenario. We've got a property. We've got a seller who's motivated. Let's say they have a $200,000 property in this case, and maybe they owe $190,000. Maybe they can't put it on the market and retail it through an agent in this case because they'd have to bring money to the closing table. Maybe they only lived there for a couple of years. Maybe they ended up getting an equity line that they maxed out, whatever the situation is. And many times sellers like that are eager to do something creative. So there's not enough equity for me to stay in the deal. In other words, I'm not going to buy it for $190 and move it for $2,099 and take the risk if something happens. There's just not enough meat there for me to stay in, right? So in this case, we'll do what's known as a cooperative lease option, where we cooperate with the seller and we cooperate with a tenant buyer. And what we do is we actually assign our agreement to a tenant buyer for a fee, which is typically 3.5% or $5,000, whichever is greater. 3.5% of a $200,000 home puts us around $7,000. Let's say the seller is insisting they have to have $200,000 to do this deal and get something down. We'll market that property again, let's say for $2,099. We'll get $20,000 down. Out of that $20,000, I get a $7,000 assignment fee. Tenant buyer will go into contract directly with the seller. The balance of the $20,000 goes into the seller's pocket, or $13,000, and they pay the seller directly until they're ready to finance, usually in 18 to 24 months. But we're out of the deal. So we're literally wholesaling pretty homes.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. And their first month's management fee will be half off for all new clients who sign up between now and the RPOA's annual conference in February. And what did you call that again?
Cooperative lease option.
Cooperative lease option. And that sounds like a scenario you would do if the original seller is either underwater or just, can't sell because they would have to bring cash to the table.
Many times that's the case. Not always the case, though, Brian, because sometimes a seller may own a house free and clear. They own another house, and maybe that was a rental for them. And they're okay cash flowing it with a tenant buyer. So many sellers that we work with, or owners, I should say, are landlords who are willing to do something creative, maximize their profit on a property, and then we get an assignment fee and we're out of it. Because our marketing, which we'll talk about at the conference, is very unique in finding tenant buyers, and they come out of the woodwork.
It does seem like the marketing systems you have in place are key here, because you're marketing for a very unique type of home owner or seller who doesn't want to go the traditional, hire a realtor to sell their property route. And you're also marketing to the type of end buyer who can understand what the lease option is all about.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So those are the people that we're going to work to uncover.
Exactly. So how do you uncover them?
Well, a lot of times we will target people that are marketing their property in some way, shape, or form as a for sale by owner or as a for rent. And those are the people that we are going to go after in our approach to talking with them about doing something creative. And so out of that group of people, we tend to find a pretty large number of people that are willing to do something creative.
And are you looking all over the country, or are there specific areas that you stay within?
Well, when it comes to cooperative lease options, we do these all over the country. We're expanding and doing these in several states. The reason why is I don't have to leave my home to do them. Okay, we can market them, we can take care of all the documentation, all the payments for our assigning fees. That can all be done remotely. So what we have found is that if we are going to try to do a larger number of deals, then we are going to expand that radius in order to cover more areas. When we do sandwich lease options, one of the things that I teach is we don't want to do those at a long distance because we are responsible for maintaining and making sure that the tenant buyer is performing, again, because we're staying in the deal. So I like to teach my students that when you're starting out doing sandwich lease options, do them within a reasonable period or a reasonable time frame of how long it takes for you to get there. I like to do them within an hour and a half of my home. Cooperative lease options we can do anywhere. So we like to do those in landlord-friendly states. And we will then, again, target people who are looking to move their home as an owner, and it works very well.
It seems like with the cooperative lease options, your risk is very little because you're finding that end buyer cooperative lease option person before you put up any money or enter into any agreement, and you don't have to stay in that deal. But with the sandwich lease options, it does seem like there's a little bit more risk. Can you talk about that?
Sure. There's a little bit more risk in that we are, one of the things that we do when we go into contract with the seller on a sandwich lease option is we let them know that any maintenance or repairs are going to be handled and they don't need to worry about it. Of course, if a tenant buyer decides to do something and leave, that makes us responsible. But when they put a large amount of money down, they actually tend to take care of it. When we vet them properly, the tenant buyers, and we are going through our screening process, we are actually finding that when we do our due diligence with tenant buyers, our percentage of people who do cash out is pushing the 70% number. So we can never prevent somebody from losing a job or a divorce or whatever circumstances happen in people's lives. But if that should happen, many times they just move on. We get the property back. Typically, it's not something where they've done a lot of damage, if any at all. Many times they take care of the home. And one of the things that I will be talking about is what price range of homes to look for to do these kind of deals, because there is a sweet spot. That sweet spot actually is one of the things that determines the quality of tenant buyer that we get in a sandwich lease option. And so that's kind of an important function because we don't want to be at a high risk. I don't like risk at all. In fact, I'm very adverse to risk. The nice thing about an option, though, is let's say something were to take place or we could not take care of that property or we had to do something different for whatever reason. The nice thing about an option, and we want to go back to the very basic here, an option gives me the right to purchase the property, not the obligation. In that scenario, I always have the right to assign my interest back to the seller and let the tenant buyer pay them directly. I've only done that a couple of times in 15 years, but that exists.
Okay.
And that eliminates really a major part of risk for us. Okay.
Yeah, it does seem like it would. You threw out a statistic there. You said 70% of your tenant buyers, you said cash out. What does that mean? Does that mean they don't go through with the actual sale?
No, 7 out of 10 people actually do go through the sale.
Okay, so they end up buying the property that they
Correct.
that they intended to. So that means 30% don't. And in those cases, do you just start the process over again? Find another
We do.
buyer to put
We
down
do.
$20,000?
Yeah, exactly, Brian. While we continue to make a monthly payment to our seller, we are then marketing and putting another tenant buyer in the property. The reason why we do that is because my agreement with the seller is much longer than I go into agreement with the tenant buyers. So that gives me the ability to find somebody else in the time frame that I have to get another tenant buyer, hopefully to the point where they're qualified and cashing out. A lot of times I'm going into these agreements 7 years with sellers, sometimes longer.
Okay, so that gives you plenty of time then. How many tenant buyers have you had in any particular property?
Well, we just closed on a property that I've had for 6 years. We've had 5 tenant buyers in it.
Talk about that. What kind of money did you make off of that then? Because that seems like an ATM in a way.
Yeah, it is. It literally is like putting an ATM in your living room. It's a very, very typical property that we do. Very, common price range for us in rural Michigan here. That property ended up being worth about $89,000. Okay. In the course of 6 years and 5 tenant buyers and then cashing us out, we ended up making about $75,000 in 6 years on a house worth $90,000. So
wow.
It works out very well. And we just made a ton of money on that property. I'll talk about that at the conference too.
Yeah, and keep in mind that you had no money into that.
No money. No.
Yeah,
None.
so that's infinite return. So I'd love to hear some more examples, both of where you hit some grand slam home runs, and then definitely would be good to hear an example where somehow you lost some money or things went wrong.
Well, that's interesting. I've actually, in 15 years, I've never lost money on a deal doing this at all, ever.
Really? Well, then what's the worst case scenario of what might have happened on any property in your experience?
The worst case scenario that ever happened to me is a property that I picked up, in that 2009, 2010 time frame. Properties were bottomed out in terms of their value. People couldn't sell homes. Excuse me. People couldn't move homes because banks had clamped down, and the free financing type of flow of money was gone. We picked up a property, 3-bed, 1.5-bath property. Again, very typical. The seller owed $77,000 on it. I thought at that time I can move it for $85,000. Okay, I wasn't trying to do anything but, in this case, help the seller out and control this property for future profits. Put it under contract for 5 years, and we had 3 tenant buyers over the course of about 5 years. The last tenant buyer was performing and working on building their credit. The problem was that property never came up to a value that I was going to make really anything significant or worthwhile staying in the deal. I was literally cash flowing $25 a month. So my payment was, for example, I think in this one, $850. I was getting $875. I had already gotten a couple of down payments. I probably made probably $10,000 or $12,000 on the front ends. When the seller was in the cash out, they owed something like, I believe, $80,000, if memory serves correctly. But my tenant buyer, my seller, owed still something like $76,000. So out of courtesy and out of the fact that I just did not want to have to deal with all the things that are involved. And here was the other reason. My contract was up with the seller after 5 years. And I told the seller I was not going to leave them high and dry. I let them know well in advance. So his name is Adam. I said, Adam, I'm going to make sure that I guarantee everything. At the end, I'm going to assign my interest back to you, and the tenant buyer can pay you directly. You'll make a little bit of cash, and when you close, you can make the little bit of profit that's left. And I did, and I just assigned my interest back after 5 years. Tenant buyer continued to pay him, and he cashed him out, I think, that following year. But there was just nothing there for me to take the risk of staying in the deal any longer, right? Mm-hmm. If that tenant buyer would have trashed that property, and I'm not saying that that possibility doesn't exist, it always exists, but when they tend to put a large amount of money down, they take care of it, right? So I didn't want to risk losing anything or the little bit that I had already made on that property. And the seller was fine. The seller was happy because we performed throughout the 5 years.
That's great that, that's your worst case scenario. It doesn't sound very bad at all. Give us another story about a home run that you might have had.
Sure. Yeah. Probably one of the best grand slams was property that we picked up actually 7 years ago. It's closing probably within the next 60 days. So we'll be completely done with the deal. It's a 20-acre horse farm. Just outside of town where we live. And it was worth 7.5 years ago, it was worth somewhere in the vicinity of about $225,000. Seller owed $210,000 and tried selling it as a for sale by owner for 2 years and couldn't move it. We picked it up. I agreed to make the monthly payment of $1,100 a month. That included taxes and insurance. Their mortgage balance was $135,000. And I asked them, what is it you would like to get out of this property? And they said, well, if you could get us $80,000 out of this property, we would be happy. So I asked them the question. I said, if I guarantee $80,000 at closing, whenever that is, do we have a deal? They said, yes. And I said, great. So my purchase price was $80,000 cash at closing after mortgage payoff. That was my price. Well, with their balance being $135,000 plus $80,000, that put me at $215,000 I would have owed them day number one if I was to cash them out. I moved the property for $250,000. Got $15,000 down, $1,600 a month. I was cash flowing $500 a month. The first tenant buyer had to move out of town. They lost their $15,000. Got another tenant buyer in, and after a year, they had to move. So at this point, I've made $30,000 in front end payments, now counting $500 a month of cash flow. Third tenant buyer is in there now, getting ready to finance and get cashed out. We put it under contract with them for $260,000. We're going to make, when it's all said and done, somewhere in the vicinity of about $110,000 on this property in 7 years on a property we haven't touched. We didn't put money down. We didn't rehab. And that's the biggest property, single-family home that we will have made 6 figures plus on.
And that's great considering you didn't have any money into it. How much time and energy did you put into that property?
Probably a couple of hours in meeting with the seller over maybe 3 meetings, a couple phone calls. We probably marketed the property I think we ended up marketing it for a couple of months. My agreement with them was I would not start paying them until we found a tenant buyer. The agreement was they were going to stay in the house until a tenant buyer was found. Then they were going to move in a house that they were working on, and it worked out great. So I mean, collectively, I would probably be lying if I said it was more than $10 or 10 hours.
That's a phenomenal return on your time.
Yeah.
What kind of objections do you typically get from the owner sellers?
Well, there's always the same kind of objections. Typically, they range from the most common one is, what if the tenant buyer tears up my home? We expect that going into the deal as far as the question. So we always let our sellers know that tenant buyers, when they have a significant amount to put down, tend to take care of the property far more than just a straight renter. And we're not looking for people that are straight renters. So we kind of let them know that ahead of time. The other is, when can I expect to get cashed out? Right? And on average, it's about an 18-month process. So while I can't guarantee it in 18 months, I let them know it's going to be somewhere around 18 months. But in that time frame, you're going to be making extra money too. And you're going to be cash flowing it, and you're going to be, making more than if you tried to sell this on your own. And we actually will give them multiple offers to show them how much more they can make if they wait a little while for their equity. Mm-hmm. Probably the other objection that they have is, especially on a sandwich lease option, I ask them right up front, I say, if you are giving me the ability to guarantee the maintenance and payments and take care of any problems that exist, is that going to keep you up at night? I ask them that. Because if that is, then, sleep on it. We don't want you being uncomfortable with that. I want it to be, you mentioned early on, Brian, we want this to be a win-win, and also a win for the tenant buyer. We don't want to set up anybody to fail. So I don't want a seller that is going to be, driving by every other day and knocking on the door if the tenant buyers are in there and, causing any kind of issue in their mind's eye. We want them to know that everything is taken care of. You can move on with your life. And that's probably the biggest thing that they want to know is it going to be taken care of? And so a lot of times what we do is we give them references of some of the sellers that we have helped over the years and let them talk directly with them.
I am curious, one of the themes in talking to the other speakers in these types of conversations is just the economy and where it's heading. And I'm wondering how Lease Options will work in a downturn or another recession like we had before.
Actually, for lack of a better explanation, I'm really looking forward to another downturn, because many times we can get the best deals when that happens. And I'm sure anybody who is doing any kind of investing understands that. The market is tight, right? While there's deals there, for the new person starting out, it tends to be a little bit more of a challenge sometimes to get those deals, especially if they don't have a marketing budget, right? So that's one of the reasons why cooperative lease options are so really just absolutely the best strategy to make money very quickly. The reason is because we don't have to negotiate with the seller. We can get the seller full asking price for their property. We don't stay in the deal, okay? And we can market that property, assign our interest to the tenant buyer, get paid, and be done and move on to the next one. So cooperative lease options right now is a hot strategy because we are able to get the seller full retail price for the property. If the market takes a downturn, which I'm fully expecting, I think it's inevitable. Now, how long? I don't know, but I will say this. One of the tools that's going to allow us to reap big profits when that happens is lease option type of strategies, creative financing, for the specific reason that sellers will not be able to sell. When sellers can't sell, they become far more motivated. And if you can cover their monthly payment and work with tenant buyers who can't get financed in a down market as well, even though now the market is hot, again, the vast majority of people cannot get financed. But when a downturn takes place, more of them cannot. Even though they've got money, they've got significant money to put down, they've got enough cash, they've had a credit event in their history that they can't get financed today, we can help them do that, get them into a property, and everybody wins. I think that's going to take place. I think this bubble that we're kind of sitting on right now is one in which, when that market changes, this is the type of strategy that you have to have in your toolbox to be able to take advantage of all the opportunity that's going to be out there. There's going to be a lot.
Yeah, well, you'll be talking about it at the 2020 Michigan Landlord and Real Estate Investor Annual Conference and Expo, which is happening next month right here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, February 27th through 29th of 2020. For our listeners who are able to make it, close enough to Grand Rapids or willing to come all the way to Grand Rapids to hear you and the other featured speakers speak, tell them why they need to come hear you in particular.
Well, one of the things that they're going to learn from me is going to be a lot different from probably most people. I'm going to show you how to get involved in real estate investing with little to no money, if at all. No risk. Because we don't want you kind of, banking the house or the kids' college fund on future, paydays that might be coming. The other thing, too, is without having to spend really any money on marketing, and I like to teach my students how to do it for free and start doing deals immediately. When you get these techniques moving, not only is there a lack of the risk as well, not having to use any credit or anyone else's money, what happens is that this opens up a whole kind of Pandora's box into other opportunities. I have viewed this exact function of doing deals as the seed money that has allowed me to do many other types of deals, all of which has come from real estate profits, not from going into debt. I don't believe anybody should go into debt in terms of marketing. People shouldn't go into debt for, getting involved in controlling properties. Let's do this in a way that eliminates all that. Okay, let's eliminate the worry about having funds or having a lot of time, because a lot of people, if they're going to get into rehabbing, a lot of times they have to babysit contractors and different things like that. We don't need to do any of that. Let's get involved. Let's start making money. Let's even do this 2, 3, 4 hours a week. I typically do between 1 to 3 deals a month. Okay, and I work about 3 hours a week doing it. Okay, and I'm making 6 figures. So this is the kind of thing where you don't have to have a full-time commitment to make a full-time income. We can do this part-time, and that's what I'm going to talk about.
Fantastic. Well, Jim, you're going to be speaking at our Real Estate Investor Annual Conference and Expo right here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's February 27th through 29th. And I'd encourage our listeners to go to rpoaonline.org to register and find out more about when you'll be speaking and what some of the other activities are going to be at the conference. I really want to thank you for talking about the different types of lease options, both sandwich lease options and cooperative lease options, the difference, how they work, and sharing some of your examples with us. It's really been a pleasure, and I'm definitely looking forward to hearing you come speak at the conference.
Thanks so much, Brian. It's great to be with you, and we look forward to everybody being there. Don't miss it. It's going to be an awesome time. Thanks again.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.